Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I am excited to hear more about your practice. And so why don't we start there? Tell me about you and the work that you're already doing and yeah, projects you've got going on.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So, like I kind of mentioned earlier, I started off doing sex education work, and I still do sex education work, but it's like always been a passion and a dream of mine to kind of work in birth spaces. The weird thing about my life is that I end up watching a documentary and it like changes the course of my life. And I remember watching the documentary about like birth monopolies, and I was really just kind of taken aback by the fact that in our society today, there's so much that falls through the cracks, like so many people who fall through the cracks of like birth work, and there's no need for that if we can support our own communities. um so I think honestly, like the center of what I do is like supporting my community. I love the community that I was raised in. It taught me everything I know, and I just feel like it's really important to give back to it. And I think that something that I live by is that like there are like sexuality is like everywhere, right? Like it's in everything we do. And no matter what you can think about, like at the end of the day, it kind of ties back to sexuality somehow, which is kind of a weird philosophy that most people like don't really like identify with. They're like, what? I don't understand. But like sex and sexuality, like sex isn't just like, doing the dirty, it's like, it's in lots of parts of our lives. And so I think specifically like with my doula practice, as like a queer person, I kind of know people who like had birth experiences and just like had these really awful experiences, and I something that I always wanted to do is like take the othering effect out of like healthcare and health education for queer people. And so that's kind of like those are the two things that like I like are my biggest goals for like my doula practice, is like to center it around like a community of folks who like were able to kind of share information, and then also take like the othering factor out of like care for queer people, because it's like we're just like everyone else. Like we don't like we don't need you to make it seem like, okay, like there's this healthcare and then there's your healthcare, right? Or there's, what I mean, there's this birth experience and then there's your birth experience, right? So yeah, it's kind of a long rambling rant, but that's kind of the two things that like I really are important to me in my practice.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I love, kind of hearing about being really rooted in a local community and at the same time, reaching a larger audience online. I'll ask you where people can find you later on. So on that note, what are you queering right now?
What am I queering right now? Well, let's see. What am I not queering right now? I feel like every day of my life I'm just a big old queer. But let's see. I think one thing that like I've been like really trying to do in my own local community, around just like kind of some advocacy for like healthcare in the queer community, um, is trying to make like a standardization across our local like community clinics for like basically when you have like a chart, right, you typically have someone's dead name and their incorrect pronouns, right? And so something I've been like trying to work on with like our county like resources is creating some sort of system in our current systems where we can like have on someone's chart their correct name and their correct pronouns, which is something that like I feel very passionate about, like making sure is like at the basis or the basic level of care that you give someone is like calling them by their right name and their right pronouns, right? And I feel like in so many medical spaces it's just like it's traumatizing. It's traumatizing to be in a medical space and just constantly have people get it wrong, and it's like at the end of the day I think that no one should have to deal with that, and like no one should have to be their own advocate for that. Like that should be some behind the scenes stuff that someone else is doing or figuring out. Like you shouldn't have to know about all of the crazy BS that has to take to get there. But yeah, I'm currently trying to queer my community health clinics is what I'm doing.
That's awesome. Queering institutional paperwork, which
Yeah.
is necessary work, but obviously not everyone wants to do that. So that's
Yeah.
amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
That it can work out. Let us know.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
figure out how to make that happen and it's just some kind of system we can put in place in all of the other counties, like,
Yeah. I'm working on trying to like figure out a way to like standardize it, because mainly I have this like issue where like I constantly like, it's not an issue, it's just me as a person, where like I just knock on people's doors and like show up to people's offices and like cold call them all the time, and they're like, who are you? And I'm just like, I need to find a way to just like make sure that I can standardize it, so that way like it's not just like a back door that I was able to get through, you know.
sure. Yeah. But that's, I mean,
Towards
any way you get in. Yeah. And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's really awesome. So I know we talked a little about this earlier, but what originally inspired you to do the work that you do today?
Yeah, I think like I kind of mentioned before, documentaries have been like a very persistent thing in my life. I watch a documentary, I get really upset, and then I'm like, how can I change this? But I think birth work specifically um, is what called me to kind of like get involved in that. Is I've always kind of been interested in care work. I think like femme people are kind of always like, even if they don't want to be, called to do a lot of care work, unfortunately a lot of times for free or low cost, right? But something that like I was really passionate about was providing care work in the realm of like a reproductive sphere, because that was something I was really passionate about, and something that I felt like was lacking in a lot of like reproductive health outcomes, whether that's birth, whether that's abortion, whether that's miscarriage, you know, whether that's taking a pregnancy test, right? Um, and I think that something that was was really was really kind of the call to action for me was when I learned about the like crazy disparity of maternal mortality rates in our country. And I was just like, there, like realizing that there's no need for that. Kind of was like, I have to be part of the solution somehow. Um, and so like kind of combining my desire to like be there and support people through whatever reproductive decision, and also wanting to like be a solution to the problem of maternal mortality rates, kind of called me together, I think. So it's like a combination of like my own just like wanting to like hold people's hands, and then like my own like desire to like be involved in some sort of activism. And I think that something that is cool but also sometimes a little disappointing about like working in reproductive health spaces is that like at the end of the day like it's all kind of tied to activism, because you know people with uteruses have for the longest time like been under the control of whoever wants to decide how your reproductive system is used, right? And so I think that that is kind of something that calls me to do the work. But yeah.
That's awesome. And I know you touched on this a little earlier, thinking about like the sex in everything,
Yeah.
but what's your support philosophy? Like that aside, like worldview
Mhm.
philosophy
Yeah.
included in, yeah, your, you know, what kind of lens do you bring to that support work?
Yeah, I think the first like and foremost like kind of philosophy I have for support work is that like it support work should be given to anyone and everyone who asks for it or needs it. Um and I think that, you know, if I'm not particularly like the doula for you, or like there's someone who can advocate for you better, like I will definitely help you figure that out. But at the end of the day, like I don't ever want to like turn someone away because they can't pay for it, or because, you know, they are you know, in a situation where, you know, maybe their family doesn't support their decisions, or whatever it might be. I think that care work is like a human right, like having someone to advocate for you and having someone to like hold space for you is a human right, I feel like. Even though it's not like people will argue with that, but I think it is, you know. I think that um having someone to just like you know, hold your hand through things is something that, you know, humans need. um and so that's kind of like at the base of everything. I'm just like, no matter who you are, no matter what you do, no matter like how things turn out for this pregnancy or for whatever reproductive decision you're making, like I want to support you. Like I want to be here for you. And then I feel like the other lens of that is kind of like I mentioned, the whole, politicizing of reproductive justice. I feel like what's really important to me is bringing back the autonomy of a person, like in my practice. So making sure that like I have the tools to support someone through understanding their own autonomy. Like I said, we live in a world where there's a lot of situations where femmes or people with uteruses don't have autonomy over their bodies or over their decisions in life. And so I think that's like the second tenet of my sort of practice philosophy is just I really want to be able to give people the tools that they need to sort of, I don't like the word empower, because I feel like empower kind of implies that like I'm giving you the power when like you already have the power. And I think especially something that's kind of, this is a whole nother rant, but something that's kind of like damaging and I don't really like is like when specifically white women like tend to try to say like I'm going to empower you, or like we're going to empower you to do this or that to like people of color, or whatever it might be. I think what's important is that, like you have a set of tools, let's share a set of tools, and then let's figure out how we can make the best outcome, right? So I think sharing knowledge is like the other part there. I don't ever feel like we should protect a secret of like, oh, like, well, this provider said this or this and blah 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 or whatever it is. I just think that sharing knowledge is really really important. And I think that if we did more of that, you know what I mean, then some of the problems that we have in the reproductive health sphere wouldn't be so bad. But there's a lot of gatekeeping. But yeah, I feel like this is a little rambly, but
Great. No, you covered so many good things. I think it's important to have that breakdown empowerment conversation. Like, what does that mean? What do you mean when you say you're doing it for someone?
yeah.
And also, that gatekeeping of information, it's so interesting to like toe that line when chatting with clients about, oh, well, do you know that hospital you are choosing has XYZ statistics of this, or that I've seen that provider XYZ, I mean, it can be hard to share that stuff, but it is also like life-saving,
Yeah.
and trauma preventing and all that.
Yeah.
So it's just so important to bring those things up in these,
Yeah.
worlds.
Yeah. And especially when it's like, I feel like the mystery around birth has like forever been like, ever since it got really medicalized back in the 1900s, there's kind of this like idea that like birth is a secret, and like what happens in birth, like no one really knows. You see this picture of it on TV where a woman is like screaming and then she like gets into the labor room and then the baby pops out, right? And I feel like I've met so many people who just like they come to like birth or come to their experiences and they're like, I'm just scared. Like I don't know what happens. Like I don't know like what the process is. And I think that demystifying that is really important to just kind of let people be able to support themselves best by having that information.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we've heard a little bit about your natal work and your sex education work. I'm curious about your natal chart. So tell me your sun, moon, and rising.
Okay. So if I tell everyone my sun, you guys have to promise to not think I'm the worst person ever, because I am a Gemini.
That's funny. I'm a Gemini rising. It's fine.
You're a Gemini rising? Okay. Well, I am a Gemini and everyone hates us, but I promise I'm not the worst. I am a Gemini rising, but my Gemini sun, but my moon is a Pisces. So I'm very emotional. I feel my feels.
Sure.
And then my ascendant is a Capricorn, which I don't really like identify with particularly. Like that's the one part of my like, I feel like my like chart, every time I look at it, I'm like, yes, that's it. That's me. But like my ascendant, I just like, I don't relate with like Capricorn vibes at all.
Give it some time. We've had some lovely Capricorns actually that we've chatted with. So maybe you'll get it through the queer.
Okay, yeah. I'll be able to figure out the Capricorn vibe a little better.
Yeah. Note on Geminis though. I had a client once who she was a Gemini and also a twin. and she was having, her baby was a Gemini also, like due around that time. And
Uh-huh.
but it was a single baby. But when the baby was born, her placenta had like, it was two lobed. Like she had like this beautiful, it looked like the letter B or like a heart, like very much two
Uh-huh.
placentas. And she
Hmm.
was like, "It's my Gemini placenta." And I was just like, "You're blowing my mind." Like,
The
so
power of the Gemini, man.
yeah, it came through on all levels that day for sure. So yes, I'm
I
very
know. I have a theory that like people seem to think that Geminis are two-faced, but my theory is Geminis aren't two-faced. Geminis are like socially and emotionally intelligent, so
no
they
head.
can adapt to different social situations, and that's why people think like, oh, you're one person with this person, and you're another person with this person. Like, no, Karen, I'm just socially emotionally adept. All right.
I get it. Yeah, it's, yeah, read your audience. That is what I would say.
Yeah.
Amazing. So perfect. I love that. Thank you so much for going there with me.
Yeah.
Favorite thing about being a queer support person and or working with LGBTQ plus families and
Yeah. Um, okay. This is, I mean, maybe it's because I am queer and like I just have this like I have this bias, but like queer people are just like they genuinely are like just 100% full like humans, like they just like embody like what like being a human is like, because like there's so many varied like people say like, you know, the LGBTQ rainbow, but like I get why we call it a rainbow, because like when you look at like the queer community, there's just like so many beautiful colors, right? And I think that what my favorite part about working with like LGBTQ folks or queer communities is just that like at the end of the day, like we like while we all have wildly different stories and like wildly different experiences and we come from different places, like there's always like every time I have a conversation with a queer person, there's always that like one thing that we can kind of connect on, regardless like whether it's like we talk about astrology or like whether or not it's like we talk about, you know, queer eye, like I don't know, like whatever it might be, like it's like there's one thing that I can always like find with like people in my queer community to talk about. And I think also there's just kind of like a safety in like being in those communities, knowing that like we've all faced something, right? And so I think like trying to support other people through like a collective trauma that like queer people have experienced, there's sort of a bonding part there. And then also just like I really love working with queer youth because they're so smart, like they like I feel like they know so much more than I did when I was their age, right? And like they come up with like all these new words and just like they're always innovating things, and I'm just like, y'all are cool, like y'all are really awesome. So yeah, I love working with queer youth specifically, but yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much. Well, speaking of queer youth, like maybe we can go there, but I'm curious if you could improve one thing about sort of the conception, pregnancy, birthing, postpartum, family process for
Hmm.
queer and trans people, including maybe like teens,
Hmm.
um, what would it be? What would you
Yeah, I think I think, okay, one of my little pet projects, like I said, is to like one day live in a world where like no one gets dead named on their like chart, right? Um, like it's something that's pretty simple, I think. You know what I mean? And I think we could solve that issue. So that's kind of like, again, my pet project, my pet peeve in the world is like, I think we can live in a world where that doesn't have to happen. We just need to try. But I think something that I would really like really that's really important to me is kind of normalizing like the process of getting pregnant, like the different processes of getting pregnant, because I feel like, you know, oftentimes, you know, there's people think of one way to create a family, right? And I think that it's really important for us to kind of change our mindsets about like how families are created, and to normalize that, like, you know, okay, like maybe I adopt a child, maybe I, you know, do in vitro fertilization, whatever it is, right? To just kind of normalize that and make it more accessible, right? So that people know what their options are. And to just kind of support those different outcomes and options, right? I think that that's a really a really important thing that like we could just use a lot more support around. And then also another kind of like littler thing, it's not little, but like something that's like kind of important to me is giving like part of education for young people is kind of talking about like how hormones, how you know, top surgery, bottom surgery, whatever kind of medical transition you might be going through might affect like fertile or your fertility in the future. Something that like I've been trying to like navigate uh, while also like towing a line is, you know, when you're a young person, you're probably not thinking about like if you want to get pregnant 20 years down the line, right? But unfortunately for young trans people, it's kind of something that you got to keep in mind when you're doing transition, right? And so I think that I think, well, first of all, I think that, you know, there should be, you know, sex education and health education that's inclusive of trans young people to begin with. But, you know, in those rare educations that do exist, I think what's really important is to talk about like, you know, the different options that people might have, you know, growing up to create families, and then tying that back into, you know, being able to create a more open conversation about like how families are made and created. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Similar to what you were saying before about birth, like you don't see it happening, right? Like
Hmm.
people aren't involved. It's not like a community event of like,
Yeah.
you know, these conception stories, while they very much are for a lot of queer and trans people, like
Mhm.
involving many friend families and different care providers and approval with
Yeah.
therapists and like a whole community of people involved.
Yeah.
There's still that kind of air of mystery about it. So yeah,
I
I think
think that's like a super important thing to like note on is the idea of like making like creating communities again. I think especially in like these corona times, like the emphasis on like individuality like in America has always been like super up there, right? And I think that we could learn a lot from, you know, cultures and communities that really focus on supporting their communities. I think it would help a lot of the things happening in the world. Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. I like your to-do list. We'll get on
Yeah.
that as soon as we can, you know, get over our individualism.
Yeah.
Love it. Well, you know, for new or aspiring queer and trans sex educators, you know, medical systems coordinators, birth workers, do you have any advice?
Yeah, I think, well, as like a newer doula, I would say that like something I've always like kind of tried my best to do is like not be afraid of, you know, like doing the wrong thing, because like you're gonna do the wrong thing. And so like just kind of knowing that like it's okay to mess up because that's how we learn. And it's okay to take things slow. It's okay to figure it out on your own time. The great thing about like birth work and like work around like how our bodies work and how we operate in the world is that no one owns that information, and no one is like the one authority who can tell you like you know, like this is how you do this or this is how you do that, right? So like just kind of trusting your own intuition as a person in the world and knowing like, okay, what's right for me, what's right for my clients, what's right for my community, and like how can we all you know, be more comfortable with that. So yeah, I think my ultimate like lesson takeaway would be just kind of like to trust your own intuition, because intuition is powerful. You know, I feel like oftentimes we get these like these messages to like, don't listen to that like voice in your head, right? It's like, no, listen to the voice in your head.
Sure. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's awesome. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know something not necessarily sex or reproduction related about you that you want to share.
Okay, let's see. Okay. The you probably could like deduct this from like my spazzy personality, but up until like very recently, like my entire life, I've done musical theater. Um, and I loved doing musical theater. I definitely will still continue to do musical theater until I'm old. I want to be like that crotchety like old woman who's like in your community theater. You know what I mean? Um,
You know what you mean.
you know, yeah, that's like my goal. But yeah, I did musical theater like my whole life, and I'm very passionate about singing songs and dancing dances. And yeah, I actually originally like went to college to do musical theater and was like, I'm gonna be on Broadway and like do that whole jazz. But then life took a very different turn, and I was like, okay, like we're gonna do this instead. And like the
Documentary.
great yeah, I was like, oh, skirt, you know. But the great thing about theater is that like you don't have to be on Broadway to do it. Like you could literally just like be in your like neighborhood nativity scene, you know?
Absolutely. I'm totally a theater kid. I never took it past high school, but very much have a lot of very close, very favorite queer friends from like
Mm-hmm.
musical theater summer camp. So shout
Yeah.
out to y'all.
Yeah, I love that's my favorite thing about looking back at our high school like theater department is I'm like we were all so queer, we were all so gay, and like you know what I mean, like we just didn't like all know it at the time.
Yeah, you knew
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Amazing. Well, awesome. So thanks so much for sharing all about you and your practice. Like if folks want to follow you or learn more about you and your sex ed offerings and your doula offerings, where can we find you on the internet?
Yeah, so my Instagram is like kind of where I like post like daily stuff and updates about like what I'm doing, and that is Alyssa Tex, ALYSSATEX. And then I also have my fancy website that I'm really proud that I made because I'm really bad with technology. But I have my fancy website, which is just alyssatexeira.com. My last name is kind of complicated, so I think that you can kind of, you know, it's Teixeira. It's Portuguese. But yeah, if you can figure out how to spell my last name and you just pop it into Google, I'm sure you can find it. But yeah,
We'll make sure people have a real link too.
yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alyssa.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.